So one of the common questions that we do get asked is, which milk should I use when texturing? Now, in most cafes, they'll use full fat milk, right? The higher the fat content, the more stable the liquid is, so it's less likely to cook off and get too hot and split, and it's less likely to curdle with our shot as well. So your full fat milk, the higher the fat count, the sort of easier that milk is going to be to work with. Semi-skim milk is absolutely fine as well. Where we come into difficulty is with our skimmed milks. So if all of that fat is removed, it's a less stable liquid that we're working with, but also that texture that we've created doesn't stay. So we can get that milk sort of bulked out with the air by steaming it, but it goes very, very quickly before we get a chance to actually incorporate it into our drink or a latte art. We're left with a very sort of thin liquid. It doesn't have that lovely mouthfeel, that kind of, yeah, just lovely experience of drinking it, because we don't have those bubbles in anymore. That's what's happening when we're agitating the milk. So it's all about placement. Let me just texture up some milk, and I'll pour into this shot as we're talking, and I'll just show you what's happening from the overhead, and then I'll talk about it in a bit more detail using my wonderful brush as a steam wand, as an example. I'll use one of my pre-prepared shots. Lovely, powerful steam. So as I'm going through this process, just have a look at what's involved. I want to make sure that before I even start, we have lovely, powerful steam coming out of the machine. It's very dramatic in here this afternoon. And then I'll pop it into standby, and I'll place this just inside the milk with a point of contact, spinning around. So you hopefully will be able to see that just as that milk whips around the inside of the jug. And I'm holding on the handle, and my other hand is here on the opposite side of the steam wand towards the base, and that's going to judge the temperature. We're listening out. We don't want any screeches. I'll go into why we don't want screeches, what that means. And we're just letting it sort of texture along as we can hear that kind of hissing sound. And when it's hot against the touch, I leave it a couple more seconds, and I just switch it off. Now, what I'm left with is a dirty steam wand, and I don't want that. So immediately, and I do mean immediately, with a wet cloth, wipe that steam wand, just to make sure none of that milk is left on, because it will cook onto the steam wand. It will eventually get to blockages, and then we won't be happy. So if you have a manual steam wand like this Barista Pro, you just want to turn the steam wand on one more time to make sure no milk is in those little holes, so that will create a blockage. As I look at this milk here, it's quite cloudy to begin with, so I just want to do this small movement here. Again, I'll go over this and tell you why all these things are important, but just so you see the process in action, this kind of polishing the inside, and actually, you can always tell when milk is nicely textured because it just smells that little bit sweeter, and then it just gets lovely and shiny like paint, right? That's what we want. We're mixing that denser milk with the frothier milk. Any bigger bubbles, just knock down on the countertop, but only 2 or 3 times. Otherwise, you're just taking out your own rage. But that's beautifully textured milk, right? So that's what we're going to work towards in this section now. As we have it, why not just pour it in, just to show you it's about getting comfortable with consistently pouring your hearts. There you go. And now another lovely heart right in the middle. So let's talk about that milk. I'll move this onto my one. When it comes to texturing your milk, it is really about knowing where to place that steam wand. So for this example, I'm going to use this brush as my steam wand. Use the jugs to the best of their kind of abilities. So we do have this lovely spout. If we do that close-up camera there, Caroline, no, the other one there, that one. So there we are. So we can see we have a spout just here. And what I always recommend for everyone, I've trained, dozens and dozens of people at this stage. I have been training people to do barista work for about 6 years, and I've been teaching these classes for about 3. So this steam wand and our spout here are best friends. So have them locked together, right? Have that cradling inside the spout and keep that point of contact. Because fundamentally, this is going to be about consistency. If we don't lean against the spout will just move around way too much, and we'll get lots of big bubbles in there, and again, it will just be difficult to get consistency across the board. So have that point of contact, and always keep it there. Now, we just want the steam wand ever so slightly inside the milk, just skimming the surface, because if we put it in too far, or we point the holes of the steam wand directly into the liquid, we're not allowing any air to incorporate itself into the milk. So what will happen is, really, we're just heating it. So we're agitating everything, and we're just getting it hotter with very little air actually making its way inside. The first effect, the most obvious thing that will happen, is we'll hear a screeching sound that's really unpleasant, okay? So I always think you can tell when someone's being trained in a cafe, because all you hear behind the cafe bar is screeching and banging and crying, and there's milk everywhere and no one's happy, okay? If you just think that screeching sound is your milk crying out for some air, you're drowning that steam wand. So just keep it more shallow so that you allow some air to incorporate itself into the liquid. Then, if we go close up again, then it's about angling your steam wand off to the left or the right. It really doesn't matter which side, it's whatever's more comfortable for you, left or right, but certainly not right down the middle, because right down the middle again, we're not going to be moving that milk evenly around the jug, and that's what we want to do. We want to evenly heat and evenly texture that milk. Otherwise, we're going to get that screeching sound again, and we're not going to evenly do these things. So having it off to an angle and then spinning comfortably around, having that kind of cyclonic action inside, will mean that you give yourself the best opportunity to get the best and most consistent results. If you want to stay at the surface, now it's about listening as well. You want to hear a kind of hiss that's pleasant on the ear. If you're getting a high-pitched sound, it means you're not getting any texture into the milk, okay? So a high-pitched sound means you're just heating. But once we get that kind of hissing, gurgly sound, that means you're getting texture in. The louder that sound is, the more air you're incorporating into the liquid. So we actually want it to be quite pleasant, quite consistent, but if you want your kind of more aerated milks, then for your cappuccinos, or if you want to do macchiato, or you want to do an American style cappuccino, which is very, very frothy, you want to keep it very shallow. Otherwise, for your lattes and your cappuccinos, you want that hiss to stay quite quiet, but still there, still present, so that you get comfortable knowing how much texture is inside. And it may mean that you have to slightly hinge your jug so that you're keeping that steam wand at the surface as the milk rises, as it's incorporated with that air. So that's the process. It's keeping it against the spout, angling it off to the left or the right, and just allowing it to be a centimetre inside the milk, just skimming that surface so that the sound is pleasant on the ear and the milk is spinning, quite fast around the jug. The next aspect is temperature. Okay, I mean, this has a temperature gauge on it, but if we don't, it's about, if we overheat our milks, we break down those structures that we need to keep that texture inside, okay? So if we get the milk much too hot, we break all of those down, and what happens is we split the milk. So it looks bubbly on the top, but very kind of ununiform bubbles, and then it's very, very thin and watery at the bottom. It's because we've cooked that milk, okay? We've kind of scorched it. So even if we spin it around, all of those structures are now lax. So you just won't get that lovely, lovely mouthfeel. Everything's very hot. Also, not for nothing, but you probably cooked off the carbohydrates first, so they burn first, and so you're left with very flavorless milk. If you like it, that's absolutely fine. It's your house, they're your rules, you can do whatever you want. But just so you know, for latte art purposes, we don't want to get our milks too hot because we don't want to cook them. So that is the point that we get to a separation within our dairy milk and our milk alternatives. So for our dairy milk, we want it maximum 65 degrees Celsius. Okay, in Fahrenheit, it's about 150 Fahrenheit. Okay, so 60 to 65 degrees Celsius is about where we want to be with our dairy milk, because it's more robust structure inside. There's more kind of complex fats and things like that inside. As we move on to our milk alternatives, they can't take as much heat because of the structure inside. So when it comes to all of our milk alternatives, and here I'm talking about our oat milk, our almond milk, our soy milk, our pea milk, our macadamia nut milk, our potato milk. Couldn't leave that one out, could I? So all of those milks, we want to keep them at a slightly lower temperature. So really 55 degrees is as hot as we want to get those. And for my lovely Fahrenheit friends, that's about 130 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the kind of difference that we want to make. Other than that, the process is very, very similar with our milk alternatives and our dairy milk. One thing to watch out for though with milk alternatives, because of the fat difference in them, they will heat up faster. So we don't want to get them as hot, and they do heat up quicker. So just keep that in mind if you're jumping from dairy milk to oat milk, for example, because it will be slightly different in terms of the process that we want to go through. We just need to be a little bit more on it with our oat milk. If you always drink one or the other, you just learn with what you've got. It really won't make a big difference. It's only if you're changing between one and the other, you'll notice that slight difference. I'll come back to oat milk in a moment. But that is how we go about texturing the milk. If we don't have a temperature control jug or a thermometer inside, your hand is actually going to be quite good, okay? Most people, and I mean, I hear all the time people saying, well, I have asbestos hands or whatever, but predominantly 55 degrees is when the jug will start feeling very uncomfortable against your hand. So with that, you want to make sure that when it's uncomfortable, you turn off the steam wand if it's milk alternative. If it's dairy milk, you can continue on with your hand off a couple of seconds just to switch it back. That will allow you kind of a pretty good gauge, to be honest. Now, when people say, oh, my hands can withstand anything, it's not that you should feel like you have to keep your hand against a very hot jug. When it's uncomfortable, just go, oh, that's probably 55 degrees, and act, in kind of conjunction with that. But that's what we want to do. Now, when we're doing that again, just have a look here at how I'm texturing this milk. So it's all of those processes. They just become second nature the more practice you get. Okay, so now with this, again, I'm turning on my steam wand. I'm letting it get nice and powerful. On this unit, it takes about 3 seconds. On something like a Barista Express, that will take closer to kind of 25, 30 seconds. So now, hopefully Zoom will allow the sound to come out. But that's that hissing I'm talking about. Okay, we've got that kind of hiss. We can still see the steam wand, the tip of the steam wand in there. And we can see that milk spinning around quite quickly, whipping around the jug. And then I have my hand here to measure the temperature. As the milk increases in volume, I'm just hinging the jug away to keep that sound. Now, that's uncomfortable. So slowly, I go to switch everything off. That's it. I make sure that my steam wand is still in my milk as I switch off the power. Because if you don't do that, you get lovely Jackson Pollock all over your kitchen of milk, which is not ideal. So just leave it in there to die down, and as I say, wipe down your steam wand. When it comes to pouring the latte art now, it's just a 3-step, well, it's 3 steps once we get there. I'm going to say 4 for today, because the first step that will help you immediately is, if I look on here, unfortunately, because it's white, the camera doesn't pick it up very much, but that looks kind of cloudy, okay? What I want to do is I want to do this little movement. I call it polishing the inside of the jug. I'm spinning the milk all around the jug. And what that's doing is mixing the frothier milk, which rises to the top of the jug, with the denser milk that sinks to the bottom. Fairly simple. Just remember, the froth is always trying to move to the top. And we want to mix them all in together, homogenize them, so that it looks lovely and shiny like that. On the camera, you get a little bit of it, but if you see it in person, if you try it at home, you'll notice a big difference between this milk and how it started. Now, there are no larger bubbles in here, but if there were, I would just tap it, just to break up those bubbles, because they'll make it more difficult to pour an even shape. This section will immediately improve your experience. Just spinning it in. It will take longer than you think. So now that's beautiful milk. And for my latte art, I've got lovely shiny latte milk there, where if I wiggle it side to side, I get little peaks on either side. That's how I know. Now, I'll use this shot. It's a 3-step process from here. So I'm going to pour from a height until it's 2/3 full in the cup. I'm going to pour far away, about 10 centimeters away. Then I'm going to pour low and fast to get my shape. At the end, I'm just going to cut through it. So let's see, this shot has been sitting there a while now. Let's hope that it just activated again. And let me just pour in from a height. Lovely. I'm creating my canvas here. And then 2/3 full, low and fast. Keep pouring. And then I'm just cutting through at the very end to form my heart shape. And again, there's no kind of magic to it. It's what's naturally happening. And that's why I always suggest for people, focus on getting a lovely heart in the middle and symmetrical. The faster you pour, the bigger that heart's going to get. Because by pouring low and fast, that's what allows that froth to kind of spread out and actually land on the top. So the earlier you do that process, the quicker you can get the tip of your jug close to that liquid inside that cup, the bigger the shape is going to be. Then it's just about where you're placing it. In terms of common things that people find difficult with that, almost always, it's that people worry about spilling, okay? It's the biggest thing. I wore white shoes today. That's how confident I was. But this is the thing that people really worry about. And actually, in my experience, people don't spill half as often as you think they would. And I mean, this is dozens of people that I've trained, but also doing kind of live classes like this where we have 12 people in a room who've never made coffee before. They also don't spill that much because everyone worries so much they're going to spill, they end up just not pouring very much milk in. So you're left with loads of half-full cups of coffee. The biggest thing is that if we have beautifully textured milk, we've mixed it in, as long as we pour low and fast into this cup with lovely espresso, it will form a big circular blob, okay? It just will. You just have to have faith and know how fast, how much you're tipping that pitcher to allow it to go in. That's what we need. So just that confidence, try it. If you spill it, just a wipe and it will be fine. Really nothing happens. Maybe don't wear white shoes or white trousers for the first little while, but you get very, very comfortable. And just my biggest tip in terms of not spilling, use the same kinds of cups every time. Because then you get used to the dimensions of how full it gets and how fast that happens. That's the biggest thing to really focus on. Make sure that you don't change all different kinds of cups every single time. But it's 3 steps. We pour from a height, and again, that pour isn't necessarily slow, it's consistent just from a height. Because if we slow down too much, that froth again wants to rise to the top. And what will happen as we pour, the denser milk sinks to the bottom, and then it makes its way into the jug first. And so all the froth comes to the back, and at the very end, we just get a big cloud of froth fall on. Very frustrating. I know, I've been there, I completely understand. But really, if we've mixed everything in, and we just quite confidently pour from a height, then low and tip the pitcher more. That is a thing that kind of, it took me a while to understand how to explain this to people. But when I say pouring fast, it doesn't mean that you're bringing your jug closer to the cup faster. It actually just means that you're pouring, but you're tipping that jug more. It's that you're on a different axis. So you don't only have up and down, you don't only have left and right, you can also just hinge the jug. So pouring faster just means that you are tipping that jug more. to get more liquid out. And that's what will give you that shape ultimately. So it's just getting comfortable with those things, but it really is only a 3-step process once we've mixed that milk in. We create our canvas by pouring from about 10 centimeters away. At least 10 centimeters away. It could be 30 centimeters, it'd be fine. But then we want to go low and fast. Keep pouring low and fast, and the white will come out as long as we've textured the milk appropriately. And then at the very end, we just want to come up and cut through. That will change our circle into a heart shape as we just pierce it down the middle. Okay? That is all it takes to pour that heart. As I talk to you, I'm going to just brew up a few more shots. Sorry, that bit is a bit loud. Don't know how the mic took that one. But it really is that straightforward when it comes to just pouring your shots of espresso. Pouring your latte art. Because if we skip out on any of these processes, nothing will happen and it can be really frustrating. The other thing that people do is that they want to be pouring sort of fabulous, intricate, TikTok-worthy pictures. This shape, just your standard heart, and also if you texture them well, they'll all sort of stay. So we can see all of these look very similar. If we do the top camera there, and they've all kind of kept their shape. Now the color does change as you leave them, so we can see kind of 3 different colors. That looks quite nice, doesn't it? Oh, how pretty. So all of these keep their shape because that milk has lots of fat in it. So that's how they keep their shape. But it's just a relatively simple process. That doesn't mean it's not frustrating, okay? It can be quite frustrating because you feel like, I saw that Irish guy on the camera do it with such ease. Why can't I do it? And the reason is, it's just how many coffees you make, okay? The more coffees you have on your belt, the less you think about the process itself. So when you go into that cafe on a Saturday afternoon, and that barista, top knotted and tattooed as they may be, is pouring latte art after latte art after latte art, it's just because they've made hundreds of coffees that day. So when we want to see big improvements in our latte art, it's just about getting the beans in, getting the milk in, inviting people over, and going through those processes quite diligently. Is my milk too hot? Because if my milk is too hot, game's over. I won't be able to do that. Have I gotten too much texture in it? If it's very, very frothy milk, it's going to be harder to draw these pictures. So you really need to stir it in. If you over-texture your milk, there's a little tip. If you over-texture that milk and you're swirling it around and it's going into a bowl in the middle, it's cappuccino milk, but you actually wanted more of a latte, just go over to the sink and very quickly knock off the very top. Just pour a blob out. That, because it's so thick, a lot of the froth will be on the top, so just quickly go and then mix it in again. You'll notice that milk becoming thinner. So that's a good tip. That's kind of your industry, what we do in cafes when things don't work out so well. That's what we do, we pour a little bit away. But all of these things just need to be sort of worked on so that you can pour consistently. Now, when it comes to milk alternatives, if I have any non-dairy milk drinkers out there, it doesn't need to be these brands. That's why I have 2 different ones, mine and Figures and Oatly, but it could be Alpro, it could be any of them really. We just want, for the best opportunity to pour latte art, we want to go for the Barista Edition or the Barista Oat, okay? They'll all say Barista or Professional is how Alpro do it. But any of them, we just want that style because these will have an emulsifier inside, some vegetable oil, and it means that they stabilize a bit better so that they can take on the heat and not split. Because what we can have with milk alternative is that if we have a slightly more acidic coffee and we don't have a very stable milk alternative, it might slightly curdle, okay? And it's just the chemical process inside. It's really not anything to worry about, but it's not very nice to look at. You might also get not a great taste. So just by having that bit more stability in the milks, you'll get better results, shinier results, more even results. So do be sure to go for the option that is the kind of barista style one. Now, when it comes to, let me have a sip of this. When it comes to using different jugs, so we do get asked about this, what jugs should I use? Now, I have a few different jugs here, just to show you. We have kind of different size jugs. If we do the close-up one there, right? Another example of a jug. Oh, there's 3 there. Okay, so if we do those, here we are. Bring them slightly further back. So you have these slightly different jugs. Now, this is the standard one that you get from Sage. And with this, you're looking at a very, very good, consistent jug right there. And it has a nice kind of little spout on there, and it's about the size itself. So you could do sort of 2 of these cups with this. As we look at this jug here has a much kind of longer and thinner spout just there. And again, that will just affect, you'll want to use these kinds of jugs if you're doing different patterns. So this would be better for drawing lines. If we want to do lots of our kind of rosettas, or we want to do little feathers, that kind of spout, that being slightly longer will help. And then we have this jug. This jug is bigger, essentially. It has a nice wide spout just there. And again, if we're using this, it's probably that we want to do more than 1 cup at a time. If you're doing more than 1 cup at a time and you want to texture up enough milk for both, it's highly recommended that you also get a slightly smaller jug. So you pour 1, so you texture up loads of milk, then you pour into your smaller jug along the side just to stop it from splitting. You probably add a little bit more back in, and then you pour from the smaller jug. Just in general, you can do it all in one big jug. It's just likely that your first bit of latte art will be slightly more texture on that milk. You'll have slightly frothier milk on the first one than the second one. So just don't worry about that if you're just using the singular jug. Otherwise, pouring and then pouring out of the smaller one is going to be easier. That's why we might want to do different jugs. I'll texture up some milk with this jug just to show you other designs. Now that we've seen the heart, I need a little bit more milk than that, probably. When it comes to how much milk you want to use as well, we get asked a lot what the ideal amount of milk in your pitcher is. It's all dependent on the cup that you're pouring into, and it's all dependent on how much texture you want to get in there. So there's no kind of right or wrong. As a rule of thumb though, what you will notice is that it's slightly easier to texture more milk than less milk. That makes sense. So particularly when you're starting out, try not to be too stingy with how much milk you're using. If there's a little bit left over, that's going to make things much easier. It is actually quite difficult to texture the exact right amount of milk, and that will take quite a lot of time to get comfortable with. So it's just easier. The process happens a little bit slower when you have more milk, and it gives you more time to kind of catch up with what it is that you want to do. So I'll texture this milk up in exactly the same way as I did before. Lovely. Give that a wipe. And now, as I'll pour, I'll just do I'll do a wiggle part. How about that? Get some wiggle on. So this is one technique. It's the very same process. It's just that I'm going to wiggle forward and back as I go. So I'm going to mix that in again. Again, you'll see all of my kind of technique is the very, very same. I'm tipping this, doesn't matter. I'll show you in a second. I'm tipping this so that everything's in the kind of corner of the jug, of the cup, if there was a corner in a circle, but you get what I mean. And I'm going to pour in, create my canvas, and then when I pour low and fast, I'm going to wiggle it. So I have a lovely wiggle heart. Now, I don't know how good the camera is in terms of definition, because they're quite thin lines. Can you see that, Caroline? Yeah, lovely. So we can see that what I've done is, just by wiggling this slightly left and right, as opposed to this sort of shape, where it's all one color, I have the brown going through the white there. So with this, that technique, again, it looks nice. They will taste the exact same. There's no difference of those milks. But because I have that slightly thinner tip, I can get more definition in these like very, very thin kind of wisps coming off. So that's my wiggle heart. That same technique of wiggling it, if I was just to bring the jug back this way and then cut through, is how I get my Rosetta. If I wanted to do the wings of my swan, the wings of a swan are that same technique. I just come up, cut through, and come up and create a little neck and head. Or it's how I get the feather, right? Just by not cutting through at the end when the jug is fairly full. If I pop this on here, let me just show you as well another technique. So all of these start the very same. They start with my heart. That's why I always tell people, just work on the heart and everything else will be absolutely grand. Let me just pour some milk in here and texture it up. I'm going to show you a stack, okay? So this is how you do your heart and hands or your tulip. It's also how you do your rose. There's various different things. It's just 3 different actual differences of how I'm doing it. And after that, all different designs are just placement. Got lovely, powerful steam. And I'm going through this process nice and quickly, not worrying too much, because I want the same texture every single time. So all of this, again, it might seem like absolute wizardry when you see people on Instagram and TikTok doing their fancy latte art designs, but fundamentally, it's all starting with very simple techniques. Exactly what I'm doing here. Getting that lovely hissing sound, texturing that milk appropriately, and then I can reliably react and have the design I'm after. A really good thing as well, once, if there's anyone out there who's a little bit more advanced and kind of goes, yeah, every now and then I get some good latte art, decide what you're going to do beforehand. And then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Because it's a big cheat. I found myself doing it a lot. If things wouldn't work, I'd just kind of barrel out and do something else. But in here, again, this will look all very similar. I'm pouring from height. Pour from height. And then, when it's 2/3 full, maybe only half full now, pour, get my blob, stop, pour another blob, stop, pour another blob, stop. And we can just do that as many times as we like, cut through them all. And that's how I get that sort of design. Right? So we have them all stacked on top of each other. And again, it's all dependent on what ultimately you're trying to do. So as an example, we can see, here's 3, that one. Oh, they're not on camera at all. Let me bring them slightly closer without spinning. So there you go, there's 3 different designs, but fundamentally they're all starting with the very same technique of my jug. They're all to the same temperature. They're cow's milk. We're looking at about 60 to 65 degrees on them. We're pouring our shots appropriately. We're texturing it all the very same. And we're pouring into the same cup. So, as we finish off, I just want to make the point slightly clear because we do get asked this a lot. What cup should I pour into? Now, if I have a variety of receptacles, as I keep on saying, of cups, right? Here we go. There's an array of cups. We can pour latte art into any of these cups. Let me actually, my OCD will go mad if I don't sort these out. We can go and pour latte art into all of these. But the easiest of all of these to pour latte art into is the one I'm doing, right? That is nice and easy because it's shallow and it has a wide face. So that's going to be easier to get the tip of my jug to the liquid inside the cup. From here, this one, fairly easy as well. Nice wide face, but deeper. So it will mean that it will take longer for me to be able to get close, or I need to tip my glass even more, and I'm going to worry about what everyone worries about, spilling. Okay? So again, not for the faint of heart, but can absolutely get comfortable pouring into this. After that, things start to get tricky. All of these quite hard. These 3 right here. They're quite difficult to pour latte art into. This little one, just because, fills up very quickly. Nothing more than that. Can you do it? You can do any of these 3 designs in this little one, as long as you act very fast. And it's very unforgiving, because if you mess up at any point, well, the cup's full then. This is very big. Okay, so to pour latte art into this, you actually need an incredible amount of milk. So if we're pouring into something this size, and we only have a double shot, we have about 50 mils of espresso in there, that is a very big IKEA mug. So that is going to be hard to pour latte art into because we'll need to work very fast and we'll need to use an incredible amount of milk. So that would definitely need the big jug. The most difficult of all of these to pour latte art into is that. This, you can do it, but I'll be honest with you, this is for tea. All right, this is a tea mug. Because it has the kind of difficulties of all of these. It doesn't have the biggest face, and certainly face to depth, not a great ratio, because it tapers in as opposed to out. So that will mean that I need to pour a lot of liquid in, because it's also big, and it's going to be hard for me to get the tip of my jug into that mug. So when you're looking, if you do want to see a huge benefit, or a huge increase in the rate of latte art that you're pouring, that kind of cup, lovely. These are from Loveramics. They're fab. You can get them all different sizes. But that shape is really good because it's so wide, the surface area, compared to how deep it is. After that, these, I mean, you get these everywhere. What are they? They're, can't even read that there. Duralex. Duralex glasses. Very, very good to pour into because they taper wide and they're not that deep. Also making sure that I didn't actually get any oddly shaped ones, but everything's circular inside, and that will naturally just form more kind of neat shapes for you. So there we go. There's our different cups that we can use, our different jugs that we want to use, how we want to do milk alternatives, how we want to do dairy milk, and kind of your key things that you want to focus on when you're texturing your milk and when you want to pour beautiful latte art. So that's our session done. Caroline, we haven't lost you. I hope you're riveted by all the different designs. But let me know if there are any questions that I can help with.
So we have a couple of questions.
Sorry, Caroline, will you speak up just a little bit because I'm finding it hard to hear you.
So some people are asking, they're getting some mushrooms now, so how could they like change it a little bit to get the proper heart shape and not a little mushroom?
Yeah, so if you're getting kind of mushroom, I like that. People very rarely say mushroom. But it's about how, I mean, there could be a few things. One, make sure that milk is nice and mixed in. But the mushroom will be that you're not coming far enough away at the end. So you're getting the shape. So if by mushroom, if you go on the top camera there, Caroline, so if it was this one, just without that kind of base bit, so you're kind of just getting a cap on the top, and then it kind of coming through, it's that you need to move far away at the end so that you are cutting through with a fairly thin stream. So just back on me, Caroline, there. So that you want that to be a quite thin stream at the end rather than staying low and coming up. You want to make sure that you've poured, you go down, you're getting that blob formed, you're not running out of milk, so it might be that you need a little bit more milk in your jug, and you want to come back up to cut through. Having it far away will give you a thinner line that you're cutting through that blob with. What's probably happening if you're getting a mushroom is that you're just not quite getting it fully through and off in the end. Just that little, rather than a flick, think of it as an actual third step. So the first step is mixing everything in and creating the canvas. The second step is getting the blob formed. Whether it's just that one, which I'd focus on, rather than either of these two, but then we're coming back up and we're cutting through as a completely different step. And that's what sort of spearheads that little shape. Because these, also when you get them, if you get a little latte art pen, you can turn that into a beautiful fish very easily if you want to. Because we're just spiking straight through. But that's how you change it from your mushroom to your heart shape.
Beautiful, thank you very much. And then there's another question about how does this change if you're using an automatic steam wand?
So if you're using an automatic steam wand, like the lovely barista touch just there. The technique does not change, right? On all of our steam ones, you can also use them manually if you wanted to go through that manual process and have more control. But otherwise, you just want to make sure that you're always using a clean, dry, cold jug. Make sure the bottom is clean as well. And your sensor, if it's the Barista Pro. If it's the Oracle Touch, it's going to be less of a worry, but still always good practice. But we want to have, for our latte milks, they'll generally be set between 3 and 5 on the froth level. And then, as I say, with our milk alternatives, we want 55 degrees. With our dairy milk, we want it 60 to 65 degrees. So depending on which model you have, you'll have more or less control over that. If it's the Barista Pro, if it's the Barista Touch, it's in 5-degree increments. So 55 for your milk alternatives. You can do 50 as well if you don't mind it being on that slightly cooler side. Or 60, 65 for your dairy milks. On your Oracle and Oracle Touch, you'll have to within 1 degree. So you can just have a bit more play around with that. If it is on the Bambino Plus, you just want to make sure the bottom heat setting is going to be 55, and then 60, between 60 and 65 is that middle setting. The top setting is actually quite warm, it's closer to 70 degrees. But if it's either of those, it's the same thing. In terms of your froth level, you want it either on 1 or 2 on either. But as I say, you can always lift up those steam ones and do it manually. If you want to have a bit more control over them, you can absolutely do that. But the technique is all the very same. The steam ones on all of our units are really fantastic. When this unit came out, first to tell you the story, it came out at the London Coffee Festival 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. And I was on our stand at the London Coffee Festival, and there was a guy who seemed very interested about the machine. And so I thought, all right, I'll tell him everything about this machine. I know everything about it. And he kept on saying, no, I'm okay, thanks. I have the machine. I was like, oh, great, you have the machine. It's your machine, great. And it turns out he was over from Australia and he designed the steam wand. So, I mean, it would have been great had he actually asked me questions about how the internals of that steam wand works. But he was gracious and just kind of said, bless you, I know way more about this. But they took about 30,000 man-hours to develop, right? They are very, very good automatic steam wands, changing the algorithms inside to ensure that you are getting fabulous results, even with those automatic ones. So use the presets that are on there, and then just adjust them for your milk alternatives or for personal preference.
Perfect, thank you. And then final question, do you have any tips if you don't want to use all your coffee beans or you want to, your expensive oat milk? Is there any way to practice with some other items?
Yeah. So, I mean, a good way of practicing, to be honest, if you don't want to kind of go through lots of beans and you just want to do the latte art practice to get the technique, one thing that you can do if you are using your coffee is just remember, if you have made a coffee and it didn't work out all that well, pour most of it back into the pitcher that will still have some milk inside, leave a little bit, an espresso's worth. You can always take some of your ground coffee and dust it in, right? That will give you kind of a little bit more differentiation between what's in the jug and what's in here. So you can actually re-pour that, just mix it back in and do the technique again. I'm a big fan of getting people to train with water, just water on water, because what that will do is it gets you really comfortable with how full these cups get and how quickly they get full. That's a really good technique. The other one is just a little bit of soy sauce as your base, and then just a little bit of washing up liquid in the water. And you texture those up the same. So that will just give you a kind of feel for it. Having the kind of distinctive patterns will be harder that way, but these are all good things so that you don't have to kind of rip through a lot of milk, rip through a lot of coffee. Use what's already there. You can also do kind of, if you get little food coloring as well, then you can actually just pour in. If it doesn't work, again, do that technique of balancing it back out and then just adding a bit more food coloring into the pitcher so that, or into the what would be the shot, just so you get these two different colors of liquids so that you can see the difference. And that will give you a little bit more longevity just to practice and practice. But really, you'd be surprised how much work you can do just with water in jug, water in here. because that is honestly what worries people the most. Getting the perfect texture on your milk. You can practice on other things. You can practice getting it into the right spot with your washing up liquid in your water. That's fine. You can do aquafaba as well. But fundamentally, that all works slightly differently. So the only way of really getting there is practicing with the real thing. But there's lots of steps that you can do that are kind of less expensive and therein less frustrating, I suppose. All good? Fabulous. Well, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, everyone. If anyone has any more questions, we are here at the brilliant Sage Studios with a fabulous team of people working here 7 days a week. So you can always jump on sageappliances.co.uk from about 9:30 in the morning till about 5:30 every day of the week, Monday through Sunday, and type in there on Ask an Expert. It is a real person, a real live human being down here, and you can ask them questions if you have a more bespoke question about your machine, or you want to know something a little bit more in depth that we haven't covered today. Go on there. You can type back and forth. They can send you pictures. They can even set up a video call, so you have a one-to-one, and they can see you and how you're working, and then they can show you on the same machine that you have how to make any changes that you might want to. If anyone wants a little bit more info on dialing in your machine, we have the Wednesday night masterclass, it will cover some of the latte art briefly, but it will also go over our fundamentals of kind of unboxing your machine and dialing in and your extraction. So that's every Wednesday night at 6 o'clock. You'll find it in the very same place you've got this link. There may be a little survey sent out at the end of the session today, which will be in mere seconds. If you could fill that out, that's really handy for us, just so we know what content you'd most like us to create. But for today, thank you very much from myself and Caroline for joining us, and have a great rest of your day and great weekend.